was like an Ella Fitzgerald song. He was just so proud. He looked at me and he was just beaming. So I know he would really love this book. And, you know, it's important that we share our experiences in our music, you know, with the future generations. So again, we're glad you're here tonight. I thank you for coming. And I am going to introduce one of our discussion panelists. Tisha Hammond leapt into entrepreneurship in 2015 and built the plane on her way down. Now she's building a system to get you seen on stages and in pages. She is known as a small business cheerleader because her enthusiasm for entrepreneurs, with a knack for tapping into human capital, she has mastered boosting membership in numerous business communities. She is the best-selling author of Daily Devotional for Entrepreneurs, Your Season to Grow. In February 2021, her media company, Ascent Small Business Promotion, LLC, was featured by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation as a Black-owned business that positively impacts Michigan's economy and culture. In August 2021, Comerica Bank featured her company in a national Black-owned business spotlight. Later in 2021, Tisha joined forces with an Emmy award-winning media company as its creative producer, and she is always listening for your next big TV show pitched to networks. In between her own stage and media appearances, Tisha Hammond is the chief community activator at Career Master Magazine, an active board president, and a passionate Broadway fanatic. Her Access Pass media team, our sponsor, by the way, one of our sponsors along with the museum, has heard you loud and clear and has developed a signature lights, camera, action storytelling performance course. At home, Tisha enjoys life with her husband, Ken, their 5 children, many grands, and her mama. One more thing, Tisha requires frequent forgiveness for breaking out in random show tunes. Have that in common. So I would like to introduce Tisha to the stage. Bring Robin to the stage now. A native of Inkster, Michigan, Robin Michelle Wilson was born in 1984, the eldest of 2 children born to her parents, Charlene and John Morris. She began writing poetry in high school and later began writing feature articles and stories for children while a student. Robin's feature articles have appeared in successful Black Parenting magazine, the Michigan Chronicle, the New Citizens Press, Brains Magazine, and other publications. Robin earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in elementary education from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. She teaches kindergarten, French at the Foreign Language Immersion and Cultural Studies School in Detroit, Michigan. Robin made history at the University of Michigan, Dearborn as the first African-American woman to advance and be selected as an alternate candidate for a United States Fulbright English teaching assistantship in Senegal, West Africa. She taught briefly in the south of France through the Inter-Exchange program. Currently, she serves as a citizen diplomat with Global Ties Detroit. Robin has hosted delegations from Burkina Faso, Kenya, Uganda, and many other countries. The founder and CEO of Robin Wilson Educational Consulting, LLC, she combines her research knowledge and professional experience to guide nonprofit organizations in developing effective strategies for serving youth, especially young girls and women. Additionally, she uses her voice as an international motivational speaker to inspire and transform the lives of young people. She is an active member of Brightmoor Christian Church in Novi, Michigan, and she is married to her husband, Kari Tor Wilson. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Robin M. Wilson.
applause for the song. Robin Wilson. What a pleasure to be seated here on a stage at such a time as this. We have in store for the audience a fabulous conversation, and I think it's going to be very interactive in many ways. That's the hope. So let's get started. Tell us, where did your love for jazz begin in the first place?
Yes. So my father, he actually was one of the hugest driving forces in my love of music, because when I was younger, growing up in our household, my father actually had a studio in our basement. It was a home studio. So I used to actually go to sleep sometimes listening to my father recording music, and he would sometimes even have friends that would come over and record with him. So I remember just laying in bed sometimes just listening to the music. And then as I got older and we were able to go and do more things together, my father actually, we would listen to jazz music in the car, you know, our car rides, whether we were going to the gym or, you know, going to do something else. That was our bonding time. We would listen to jazz.
And since those times, so that's childhood,
Yeah.
and now you're a grown adult woman, what kind of doorways has jazz or just music in general opened for you?
So when I was younger, I actually had an opportunity to go and study at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, because in middle school, my mother enrolled my sister and I in Wayne Westland School. So I actually attended Marshall Middle School. And at Marshall Middle School, we had a really great music program. And my teacher, I'll never forget, he asked my mother if it was okay to recommend me for a scholarship to go to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp. Now, I had never heard of Blue Lake's Fine Arts Camp, and I didn't know where Muskegon, Michigan was at the time, but my mother gave him permission. She said that if he recommended me for a scholarship to go there, that she would be willing to allow me to go. And fortunately, I received the scholarship, and then I was able to go to Muskegon, Michigan, and I participated in the fine arts program there for singing, for vocal performance. And I just remember we had an opportunity to audition to also sing in Europe. I believe it was Germany that year. But while I did not go to Germany, after auditioning, they did broadcast our performance live on the radio, the local radio station there in Muskegon, Michigan. And I just remember that was just like a segue for me into other parts of the world and other places throughout our state, is through music. And that was one of the first experiences that I had, being able to go somewhere else because of music.
And we've heard you mention your father. We've heard you mention your mother. Robin has the extraordinary influence of having been raised with your parents' parents' parents.
That's right.
And the generations, and that's unique to many people. And not what I'm trying to say is not many people have that unique experience. And so tell us your experience with your grandparents and great-grandparents and their music.
Yes. So, actually, it was only really until I became an adult that I really realized how unique my experience was in growing up with multiple generations in my family, because sometimes I think when you grow up a certain way, you just assume that everyone else has those experiences, that they know their grandparents, they know their great-grandparents, and I've come to understand as an adult, like, no, everyone doesn't have that privilege. And I think it is a privilege because I not only knew them, I knew things about them. I knew things about their personalities and the types of music that they listened to. So my family came to Detroit in the early 1930s. And they came from different places. So on my maternal side of my family's originally from Boley, Oklahoma. And my grandmother actually was born in Boley, Oklahoma. And I actually have some of my family here today. So, and I knew my grandma Vondale very well because she often took care of us. When my mother had to go to work, my grandmother would take us to school, and she would pick us up from school. And then when we got home, there was a meal on the table, and that wasn't just every other day, that was every day. And so when my grandmother needed a small break, my great-grandmother lived across the street from her. So literally my great-grandmother, her name was Martha, she would meet us at the other end of the street. My grandmother would walk us across the street to my great-grandmother, and then she would take us from there. And even that, I didn't recognize when I was younger was quite unique. That you know, a lot of people can't just walk from one grandparent's house to their great-grandparent's house right across the street, but that's what we did. And because we spent a lot of time with our grandmother and our great-grandmothers, I knew I didn't get a chance to know any of my great-grandfathers. They passed away before I was born, but I knew all of my great-grandmothers. All of my great-grandmothers lived to almost 100. And because of that, I heard their music. I heard their music, everything from Muddy Waters. You talk about like Otis Redding. I knew those artists and I knew their music because that's the music that my grandparents and my great-grandparents listened to. On my maternal side, my grandfather and his parents were from Mississippi. So that's the Delta. That's where blues was born. And so I listened to all that music growing up. And obviously I had music that was my own. I think every generation has their own music. So I grew up listening to Michael Jackson and Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston. And those were the artists that I really loved listening to. But I also knew where my music came from because of my grandparents and my great-grandparents.
I've had the pleasure of reading some of your works outside of this incredible book that we're here to discuss tonight. How many people knew that Robin was a writer and an author? Those are two different things sometimes. All right. Do you remember the first published article that you came out with?
Yes, I do. I actually wrote an article for the New Citizens Press, and it was the first article that appeared in a public newspaper. So up until that point, I had written for my campus newspaper, and I thought at the time that I wanted to go into journalism. So I was looking for different internship opportunities, and I reached out to New Citizens Press in Lansing, Michigan, and they're still in existence. And the New Citizens Press gave me an opportunity. They're a Black-owned press. It started by Irina Risper, and she's someone who still supports my work, and I'm thankful for that. She actually published an article that I wrote earlier this year, and she published my first article in a community-based newspaper. It was entitled The Color of Jazz, and I wrote about how jazz music was used as a vehicle by some musicians to break down racial barriers. And that was my first article.
All right, we're here to talk about a particular writing though, right? So tell us, how did you come to write Mama Got Rhythm, Daddy Got Rhyme? Where did the inspiration come from?
It actually came from me working on that project, working on the article for the New Citizens Press, because I had to do research for the article. And I knew that I loved music. That's one reason why I decided to do the article. But when I started to do the research for the article, I started to get the idea for the book. And at the time, I didn't think that it was I didn't necessarily know that it would be specifically a children's book, but I envisioned it being a story for children. And before it was published, I would go to different churches. I would get invitations because people, even though I wasn't published at that time, they knew that I was a writer and they knew that I was a storyteller. So within the faith-based community that I was a part of, people would invite me to come to read my stories to their youth groups. And so I started sharing my story. And once I started getting positive feedback from the children and those who invited me, it really motivated me to start submitting my work to actual publishers and seeking publication for the book.
So we have mentioned that you're a writer, an author, a storyteller, a speaker. So how did you find your voice?
You know, I actually, one teacher that I had, I give credit to her. Her name was Wright, and I met her during my junior year in high school. She was my medical assistant teacher, and I had 2 years of medical assistant in high school because when I was in that phase of my education, I thought that after graduation I wanted to go into the medical field. So my school had a program, a dual enrollment program for students who were interested in healthcare professions to take credit, take courses to earn credit towards your graduation. And Rion Glennon was my medical assistant teacher my junior year in high school, and she said to me, I think that you should enter a speech competition because we had an organization called Health Occupation Students of America, and it's still in existence, and it's for young people who are interested in the healthcare profession, and they give young people opportunities to compete in speech competitions, medical terminology, different categories. I competed in speech and medical terminology, and I'm so thankful to her that she encouraged me to go in that direction because at the time, I was not as outgoing as I am now. I wasn't shy, but if I didn't know you, I was not going to necessarily be the first to go up to you and talk to you, yet alone go in front of an audience and speak. And she encouraged me to enter speech competitions, and not only did I go to nationals my first year when I competed, but then I remember the second year I won, and it was like that was what I needed to build my confidence, because it really let me know that people wanted to hear what I had to say. Up until that point, I had opinions about a lot of things, but I didn't necessarily think that anyone wanted to hear what I had to say. So by competing in those speech competitions, what it did for me at that time is it really helped me to understand that I did have a voice. And so from that point on, I could actively work on cultivating it. Yeah.
HOSA.
HOSA.
Great things in young people's lives. Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that you had an opportunity to go to Germany. It didn't work out necessarily, right?
No, it did not.
But I did some studying on the name Robin, right? And so at least one of the meanings for your name is an old Germanic meaning that means bright fame. So I ask you, if you can go back to your childhood, as a child, did you see yourself as the star that we see you as today?
No. No, because even though I definitely had a sense that I had something to offer, especially creatively, because my parents and my grandparents, they kept me involved in a lot of arts programs. So when I was a kid, I was in ballet and tap, and I enjoyed that. And then I even played the violin when I was in middle school. I played the violin. Once my mom saw that I was really serious about the violin, she then purchased me a violin, and I played for about 2 or 3 years while I was in middle school. And then, as I shared with you earlier, I sung, and I really enjoyed singing in choir. So those were the ways that I expressed myself. And while it may seem that if you are comfortable expressing yourself on stage through the arts, that absolutely you would feel seen. But I didn't necessarily feel seen in certain ways. So for example, even though I really excelled early on in the arts, I struggled academically. And I did not know at the time that I was dyslexic because I had not been diagnosed. But I struggled. And then from that point on, it was just really, I would say, I wasn't as confident in that area early on. But then at 13 years old, I actually had a church member who was also a teacher and a nurse. And she followed me out of a Bible study because this was in middle school. No, I was 13, so this was like, I was my first, getting ready to go into like my first year of high school. And I was called upon to, write out a reflection based on a Bible study that was taught. And I struggled. And I didn't want anyone to know that I was struggling. So I laid my Bible down and I walked out. And she walked out after me. And she asked me what was wrong. And she was literally the first person that I really talked to and shared that I was struggling in that way. And she really encouraged me, and she said, you can do this. And she worked with me. And so I became a strong writer. I became a strong reader because of her support. And she's actually here today. And I'm like really thankful that she's here. She's here today. But it really just, that part of me, it took some time to develop because I struggled in that way. So for that reason, I didn't think that, at least I know that where I am today, I don't think that people who knew me at that time necessarily saw this for me. I don't think that I saw this for me, but I'm thankful for the journey.
Absolutely. And yeah, please. We look at what you've been through.
That's right.
And so we can even tell in this short conversation so far that your career could have gone in 100 different directions. But you went with teaching as your passion profession. And so you've influenced a lot of little people, right? And so give us, a couple of your favorite memories from some of your youngest readers.
Some of my youngest, I will say, sometimes I think when we're working with, I call them scholars. So when I talk about the young people that I work with in the classroom, I call them scholars, my young scholars. When I work with my young scholars, one thing that I've learned is that sometimes the child that gives you the biggest challenge is the child that is going to be the biggest success in many ways. And it takes a lot of patience because sometimes I think when you have students who are exhibiting certain behaviors, like they're acting out, it's not always because they're trying to really be disruptive. It sometimes they're trying to mask certain struggles that they're having. And I think for me, one thing that I've learned, not only from my scholars, but also from my own experience, I didn't act out in school. That was never me, but I've had young scholars who have acted out in my classroom. And when I first started teaching, I used to think that, oh, I'm a horrible teacher. I just thought it had something, like to do with me. But I'm mentioning that because what I've come to learn is that, no, everyone has a story, just like I had a story. Everyone has a story, and I think that sometimes our babies, they come to school and they're dealing with things that we don't even know about. And just trying to take the perspective of, okay, let me figure out what their story is and what's really going on. And what I've often found is that when I dig a little deeper, maybe I talk to them a little bit more or talk to their parents, then the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. So that's what I've learned. That's one important lesson I've really learned from teaching in the classroom, is that sometimes the scholars who you think, oh my goodness, when am I gonna win? You know, when are we gonna get that breakthrough? Now, I just think that, you know, what I found is that with those scholars is that you just keep going, just keep having patience. You know, one day, and you may not always get a chance to see it, but you just have to know that your influence makes a difference. And it's hard sometimes because you can't always see the shift, and hopefully they'll come back and tell you, but that's one important lesson that I've learned is that, you know, it's important not to give up on our babies, because you never know how they're going to make that shift and how their narrative might change.
Speaking of narrative, can we just pause and hear a little bit of the story that you've written? Can we hear a little bit of Mama Got Rhythm, Daddy Got Rhyme?
Sure.
Everybody, you want to hear something out the book?
Alrighty, I'm going to read an excerpt. This is the beginning of the story, and it reads, inside an apartment in Harlem, New York, lived Rhythm and Rhyme in a family that had plenty of both. Daddy Rhymes could make a piano sing when he played, and Mama Rhymes could dance to any tune he played. Sometimes, Daddy and Mama Rhymes would groove to a tune, and it didn't matter whether everyone else was asleep. Mama and Daddy could still get down to some down-home blues or that music they call old school. Their daughter, Jasmine, loved music, but she liked R&B. Jasmine didn't like jazz or blues. She didn't understand them. That's the opening part of my story.
Sorry, now. I could go on and on, but the book is available.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got excited. I thought I might have heard a little bit of your story in there.
Yeah.
We'll save that for later.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you went into teaching.
Yeah.
You're a humongous advocate for education. So tell us about the importance of music education in our communities.
Absolutely. So, you know, as I shared earlier about my experience going to Blue Lake, and I'm referring back to that experience because, again, it wasn't my first time going outside of my immediate community because I'm from Inkster. And my family, my great-grandparents actually had a farm in Hillsdale, Michigan. So in the summer times, we often went up to Hillsdale, Michigan. And so it wasn't my first time going outside of my community. And I had actually traveled to a couple of places. You know, we took a lot of road trips because we had family that lived down south and you know, in different places throughout the country. But it was really my first time going to Muskegon, Michigan, and since then I've gone a lot of places. But that's one of the benefits of music education, or education in general, in my opinion, because it not only broadens your horizons, but it opens up doors for you to be able to go to other places. As a teacher, I've been able to teach in other places around the world. I've been able to travel to different places around the world because of my education. And so that's a gift. And that's why I care about education. That's why I care about music education, because I think that our young people are talented. We have a lot of talented young people, especially here in the city of Detroit. Detroit Public Schools Community District has produced a lot of talent within our city and within our country and our world. And so when we invest in education programs, specifically music education programs, I think really what we're doing is we're giving our babies an opportunity to share their talents and gifts with the world, but we're also giving them a passport to the world. And I think access is important because we are starting to get more funding for the arts to return, which I think is a really encouraging sign. And I know we have a lot of amazing arts programs even here within our city. However, I do think that we need to invest more in transportation, not just as a city, but as a state, because there's other places around our country where transportation is more accessible, and you can have wonderful resources like we do, but if you have young people who cannot get to those resources and take advantage of them, I think it's still a disservice. So that's one thing that I really would like to see change. And I also think that music education is important, because when you listen to music, and I use music a lot in our classroom, so when I'm teaching the children French, we will often sing songs together, and Papa Ute, they love Papa Ute by Stromae. He's one of my favorite artists, and they also really love Allure Dance. And so I think from that standpoint, even, it's a teaching tool. Sure. Music can be used to teach, and I definitely know that was one of the ways that I learned. When I was younger, I actually learned how to spell respect from listening to Aretha Franklin. And that was really like how I learned how to spell respect. So, yeah, it worked. Yeah.
So, we've talked about music education, but I know that representation in children's literature is equally important to you. So tell us a bit about your feelings there.
Absolutely. I think the representation in children's literature is important because it's not only a way for our children to see themselves, but it's also a way for people outside of our community to have a different perspective about us. And I think in order for there to be equity in the stories that we hear and that we see, there needs to be more writers of color at the table. And I think one of the best things about having publishers like Bristol Publishing is that independent publishers help close that gap. And I know Leslie, she shared a little bit about why she started Bristol Publishing, and it was because they were trying to help close that gap. And even in 2021, we still have that gap. And it is unfortunate, because I know there was a time where writers of color really struggled to even get their work read, because a lot of publishers did not even think that Black people read books. And it really was a belief that was held by many within the publishing industry. So if you don't think that a community reads, you're not going to publish their work, because at the end of the day, you think you're not going to make money. And while I do think that we have moved away from that way of thinking to some degree, there's still a void. And I think about Ezra Keats, for example, like The Snowy Day is a really popular book. And one of the reasons why I love that story is because it shows a little Black boy doing everyday things, playing in the snow. And I value, that story. However, that story wasn't written by a person of color. And you have a lot of stories like that are great stories, but they're not always written by people of color. And that actually is an example that I believe is a good example of The Snowy Day. It shows a little Black boy doing everyday things. But so many stories that we have published for our community or about our community are often stories that deal with oppression. And while that is definitely a part of our narrative, and I think it's important to tell that part of the narrative, I also think that it's really important to tell other parts too. Because just like the little boy in The Snowy Day, we do everyday things like playing in the snow and riding our bikes. Like, we do everyday things. And I'll never forget a couple years ago when my book was first released, I had a woman come up to me, and we were at the Jasmine on Jefferson event, and she said, "Thank you so much." And at first I thought she was just thanking me for the story. And then she said, "You have a father and a mother in the story." And it was something that was natural to me to include a father and a mother in the story. But then as I thought more about what she said, I understood why she said it. And it's because if you look at a lot of the children's literature that is published, it's either you see either the father or the mother, or you might see the grandmother. It's one or the other. It's very rare that you have both parents in the story. And I think that's also another part of the narrative that needs to change too, because we have a lot of children who still come from households where they have both of their parents. And that's a part of representation too. So I think it's complex, but I definitely am thankful for publishers like Bristol Publishing, and I know we also have Dudley Randall, Broadside Press here in Detroit, and they actually have published a lot of authors who have gone on to be known worldwide, like, Octavia Butler and, Naomi Magic who I know passed away. I actually had an opportunity to meet her when I was younger and I was first starting out as a poet, and I participated in Dudley Randall's Broadside Press, one of their events that they held for young people. I did go up to Naomi Long Magic, and I asked her if she would be willing to read some of my blues poetry, because I was reading a lot of Langston Hughes poetry at the time, and so I was experimenting with writing my own blues poetry. And to my shock, she said, "Here's my information, call me." And I did, and she actually invited me to come to her house. So I went to her house, and I sat down with her on her couch, and she read my poem, and she critiqued it, and she gave me feedback. And you know what? I never had that opportunity again. But now, that I'm older and I reflect on that time, I recognize how significant, I knew it was significant even then, because she told me that Langston Hughes actually reviewed her work, because she had started writing when she was in high school. And she told me how